Did you know that there's an unaired Game of Thrones pilot? Keep listening for the most interesting Game of Thrones facts that you never knew before. George Martin has a cameo. In the original unseen pilot for Game of Thrones, it featured a cameo from George Martin as a Pentoshi nobleman. Sadly, this scene was cut from the final version of the pilot, which was drastically altered from its original form. He never appeared in the HBO show ever since then, but he never ruled out some screen time in future adaptations. But as an added bit of trivia, he does appear in the Game of Thrones spoof by Funny or Die, critiquing his own work and slow writing style. According to some, as an estimate, the death count for Game of Thrones stands at 150,000. This figure includes all the estimated deaths in the battles, along with major and minor characters actually killed off in the running of the show. The biggest death scenes are the Battle of Blackwater Bay, the Battle of the Wall, and Hardhome, which swell the numbers significantly. Of course, these are only one person's estimates, but nonetheless very interesting. During filming for the final episode of Season 1, Sean Bean and the rest of the cast played football with Ned Stark's head. During a discussion with fans after the final episode of Season 1, Sean Bean admitted that the cast had a little fun with the model of his detached head. When asked, "Was it weird to see your own head on set?" he replied, "It was a bit strange, yeah, a bit creepy. We just kicked it around like a football." Arya Stark was apparently the hardest character to cast in the entire show. I remember we probably looked at 300 girls in England and could not find the right Arya. Benioff said, "We could just not cast her." They found Maisie Williams while going through audition videos in a Moroccan hotel lobby with bad Wi-Fi and selected her video based on a small thumbnail that looked promising. There was just something about that little tiny thumbnail face that just seemed right, Benioff said. She looked about 7, like she was 12 but going on 7. So we clicked on the audition video and waited about 40 minutes for it to download. When we saw that audition video, she was just awesome. End quote. Peter Dinklage almost turned down the role of Tyrion. In a Reddit discussion, Peter Dinklage shared the reason why he wasn't immediately sold on Game of Thrones. Quote, "I had one hesitation, because of the fantasy genre. I told them I didn't want a really long beard and pointy shoes. But they assured him that his character and this world wasn't that. They told him about his complexity, the fact that he wasn't a hero or a villain, and that he was a womanizer and a drinker. And they painted a flawed and beautiful portrait of him, so he said he signed on." Jon Snow's cape from the Night's Watch was made from an IKEA rug. Game of Thrones owes much of the credit for its characters' iconic looks to costume designer Michelle Clapton, who oversaw a team of anywhere from 70 to 100 costume designers each season. In what might be the greatest testament to the costumes team's creativity, Clapton revealed that several of the show's luxurious looking capes are made from IKEA rugs. "We take anything we can. We cut and we shave them, and then we added strong leather straps," she said. Following this admission, IKEA created a set of instructions for how to turn your rugs into a cape. Charles Dance picked up some butchering skills for a scene in Game of Thrones. Charles Dance took his role as Tywin very seriously. In Season 1, a scene required his character to skin a deer, and he worked with a butcher to learn the skill so that he could actually do it while filming. He said that was the craziest thing that he did on Game of Thrones. He said, quote, "This butcher arrived with a dead animal, and they gave me a little room to work in, gave me a sharp knife, and showed me how to skin it and spill the guts into a bucket," he said. "The next day, they gave me another dead animal, and we shot it. It was a bloody good time, but it took me 2 days to get the smell off my hands." The Red Wedding was based on real historical events. George Martin told Entertainment Weekly in 2013 that, quote, "No matter how much I make up, there's stuff in history that's just as bad or even worse," end quote. So the Red Wedding was actually based on the Black Dinner of 1440, where a dinner trap that ended in the murder of 2 children, and the massacre of Glencoe of 1692, which soldiers claimed to need shelter due to a full fort slayed their hosts. Martin used both events as inspiration for Game of Thrones' The Red Wedding. If you look closely at the faces in the House of Faces, you might recognize someone. Occasionally, the behind-the-scenes team on Game of Thrones ends up in front of the camera. Many of the faces on the House of Black and White's Hall of Faces belong to the show's production team. You need enough faces that you don't censor repeats, but you obviously can't face cast thousands and thousands of people because that's very expensive, Weiss said. Quote, "We used all the face molds we have ever used before." Both him and Benioff also appeared many, many times in the Hall of Faces, and there was at least 20 or 30 of me in there, he said, end quote. Game of Thrones weapons master got inspiration from history. Tommy Dunn, who served as weapons master on Game of Thrones, told Mental Floss in 2014 that when he was making weapons for the show, he, quote, looked at different time periods and different eras, Egyptian, monolithic, and modeled some of the show's weapons on their real historical counterparts. Not all weapons on the show were created equal, however. The weapons department would make, quote, hero weapons for the cameras out of modern materials like steel, but they were too dangerous to actually use while fighting. For that, they crafted blades out of either aircraft aluminum, which is strong and flexible and safer to fight with, or, if the scene involved stunts or animals, they made them out of rubber. One exception was the arrows. Aside from rubber tips, they made just like the real thing. If they were made of weaker wood, they would shatter upon leaving the bow. However, flaming arrows did get some modifications. A normal arrow might be 32 inches, but for the flaming arrows, like in Season 2 Battle of Blackwater, they added another 6 to 8 inches to the larger piece of wood. Then they would put on a foam wad that is impregnated with a chemical mix to burn it, so it'll be blue depending on the mix that the special effects team had to put on it. The White Walkers originally had their own language. Peterson called the language Scroth and said, quote, it was actually going to be for the very first scene of the show where the White Walker comes and cuts the guy's head off. There are parts where you can hear them kind of grumble and vocalize, end quote. But ultimately, Scroth was scrapped because, according to Peterson, quote, I think ultimately they decided they didn't want them actually saying stuff and even didn't want to subtitle it. That might have been a little corny, honestly, for the opening scene of the show, end quote. And for Season 2, a sound designer created an ice-cracking sound that finally brought Scroth to life, albeit without an actual language behind the sounds. Several characters were actually played by multiple actors. As you may know, a handful of characters have been played by more than one actor over the course of the show, notably Dario. Tommen and his sister Marcella and Gregor Clegane were all played by different actors throughout the show. After filming the third episode, Sophie Turner adopted the dog that played Sansa's direwolf lady. The first season of Game of Thrones premiered on April 17, 2011, which also happens to be Sean Bean's birthday. Shortly after the filming of the Dothraki wedding was completed, Malta was hit by one of the worst storms in their history, causing many of the props to be lost at sea. HBO commissioned the Dothraki tongue through the Language Creation Society and created by linguist expert David Peterson. At the start of filming, there were approximately 1,700 words. Now, there are close to 3,000. Actor Liam Burke was cast as Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King, in flashback scenes, but these scenes were cut from filming. Actress Maisie Williams is right-handed, although her character Arya is left-handed, so she had to learn all her fight scenes with Syrio left-handed. In his audition tape, Jason Momoa performed the Haka dance, which is an ancestral war cry dance or challenge of the people of New Zealand. Most cast members haven't read the books that the series is based on, so to find out their character's fate, as some think, affected their acting. In a letter to actor Jack Gleason, Joffrey, George Martin complimented him on saying, "Congratulations on your marvelous performance. Everyone hates you." There are more words within the Dothraki tongue for kill than there are for love. And the part When Sir Hugh of the Vale dies, including the falling horse, the spurting blood, and other effects, were kept as a secret from the likes of Sophie Turner and Maisie to create a genuine reaction. The crypts beneath Winterfell and the dungeon beneath the Red Keep in King's Landing are actually on the same set during filming. The scene where Daenerys eats the horse's heart, Emilia Clarke was actually chewing for filming all day. Her retch at the end of the scene was genuine. During the scene in which Ned is seen in a fever dream after his clash with Jaime Lannister, actor Sean Bean caught the flu in order to look as feverish as possible for the scene. Winterfell's courtyard may look realistic enough, but is actually set within a car park to allow for 360-degree shots. And finally, actress Karis Van Houten was previously asked to audition for a role within Season 1, but couldn't due to schedule conflicts. She was asked to audition for a different role within Season 2 and was later cast as Melisandre.